To anyone looking in from the outside, my life probably seems like something worth envying. A house in Oakville, a husband with a good job at a financial firm downtown Toronto, a mother-in-law who smiled in photos and called me daughter at Christmas dinners. I was 31 years old, and I had checked every box that everyone around me said mattered. What they didn't see was that I hadn't had my own bank account in 2 years. It started small. My husband, I'll call him my husband because that's what he was, legally for 5 years, suggested early in our marriage that it would be simpler if we combined finances. One joint account. He managed it. He was the one with the finance background, he said. He was better with numbers. And I, 26 years old and deeply in love and very, very stupid about what that kind of simplicity actually means, agreed. By the time I understood what I had handed over, I was already living in his mother's house. That part wasn't supposed to be permanent. His mother lived alone in a large 4-bedroom in Oakville after his father passed, and when we got married, she asked if we'd consider moving in just for a little while. She was lonely. She missed having family around. My husband looked at me with those eyes he used when he'd already decided something and was just waiting for me to catch up, and I said yes. Of course, it made sense. We'd save money. We'd been married 4 months. 3 years later, I was still there. Still sleeping in the guest room that was never quite repainted to feel like mine. Still buying groceries and being asked at dinner why I'd chosen that brand of olive oil when the other one was on sale. Or why I'd bought fresh pasta when dried pasta was perfectly fine and $1 cheaper. My mother-in-law had opinions about everything. About how I loaded the dishwasher. About the fact that I still had a part-time job at a design studio downtown instead of focusing on the family. About how my own mother called too often. My husband never defended me. He'd look at his phone or change the subject or, worst of all, agree with her. I kept my job as long as I could. The commute was brutal. Go train into Union Station, then a streetcar almost 2 hours each way. But that office was the only place in my life where I felt like a person with a name, where my opinion mattered, where I made something and got credit for it. After the second year, the pressure at home became relentless. I was never there. I was prioritizing strangers over family. My husband sat me down one Sunday morning with coffee and his serious face and said, very gently, that it might be time to consider whether the job was worth the stress. I quit 3 weeks later. I told myself it was my choice. After that, I had no income. Everything I spent came out of the joint account and he reviewed it. Not loudly, not cruelly. He was never loud or cruel in a way that was obvious. He would just mention things. I saw you went to Anthropology. Did you find something nice? With that slight pause that meant, was it necessary? There's a charge here from a restaurant on King Street. Were you with someone from work? When I had no work anymore and we both knew it. I stopped buying things for myself. I stopped meeting friends for lunch because I couldn't explain why I was anxious about spending $20 on a sandwich. I stopped being a person who did things and became a person who managed a household that didn't feel like mine and cooked dinners that were critiqued and smiled at functions where my mother-in-law introduced me as her son's wife, not by my name. My name is Nadia, by the way. I want to say that clearly because for a long time I forgot to. The woman appeared in April. I found out the way you find out things you weren't supposed to find, by accident, in a quiet moment when the world forgot to hide itself from you. I was using my husband's laptop to print a boarding pass because mine was low on ink, and a message notification slid across the top of the screen. The preview was 5 words. 5 words that I read and then read again and then sat very still with, the way you sit still when something large and heavy has shifted inside you, and you're not sure yet if you're going to cry or scream or just go very quiet. I didn't snoop. I want to be clear about that too. I closed the laptop, I went to the kitchen and stood at the window and looked at the backyard, at the 2 Adirondack chairs my mother-in-law had painted yellow one summer, and I thought, I already knew. On some level, in the part of yourself that you train yourself not to listen to, I had already known for months. The late evenings. The new habit of walking to take calls in the driveway, the way he'd started being slightly kinder to me, The way people are kind when they feel guilty, but not guilty enough to stop. I didn't confront him. Not then. What I did instead was call my older sister, Bea. I sat in my car in the Loblaws parking lot at 9 in the morning and I told her everything. Not just the 5 words on the screen, but all of it, 2 years of it. The account, the job, the olive oil comments, all of it spilling out in a way I hadn't let it before because saying it out loud made it real. Bea listened without interrupting, which is not normally her style. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment and then she said, "Okay, here's what we're doing." Faye had a good friend. Her name was Lynn, a family lawyer she'd met through a community legal clinic in Hamilton. Faye had already, apparently, given Lynn my number 3 months ago, just in case. I hadn't called. I called now. Lynn was exactly what I needed. Direct, practical, no drama. She explained things to me in terms I could understand. She told me what I was entitled to. She helped me understand that the joint account wasn't the trap I thought it was. That in Ontario, marital property is marital property, and that 2 years of unpaid domestic labor in his mother's household was not something the courts ignored. She told me to document everything quietly and to open my own account at a different bank from any account my husband used. I did that the next week. A checking account at a credit union in Burlington. I deposited nothing into it yet, but having it felt like standing up straighter. I didn't leave immediately. I had a reason for waiting, and the reason was that my husband had told me, without knowing he was giving me anything, about a dinner. His firm was celebrating a senior partner's retirement. It was going to be at a restaurant in Yorkville, the kind of place with a Prix d'Expixie menu and a sommelier and people dressed in things that cost more than my first car. He had, in what I can only describe as a masterpiece of audacity, told me that his colleague Renee would be joining them and that I should feel free to come or not. It's a work event, you might find it boring. Renee, that was the name from the laptop screen. I told him I'd come. I also, the week before the dinner, called someone I hadn't spoken to in several months. His name was Damon. He was not an ex. He was not a romantic interest. He was a man I'd met through a mutual friend 2 years earlier. A quiet, steady man who worked in insurance and coached youth hockey on weekends in Mississauga, and who had been very gently kind to me at a point when I was not used to anyone being kind to me without wanting something in return. We'd lost touch the way you lose touch with people when your life shrinks down. I reached out, explained that I needed a favor, a strange one, and asked if he'd be willing to be my guest at a work dinner. He asked if I was okay. I said I would be. He said yes. I did not tell him why exactly. I told him there was a situation I needed a witness for, that nothing would be asked of him except to show up and be himself. Damon was the kind of man who showed up. He ironed his own shirts. He was on time. He asked questions and listened to the answers. I'd missed him without quite letting myself know it. The night of the dinner, I took the longest shower of my life. I did my hair the way I used to before I stopped having reasons to. I wore a dark green dress I'd bought years ago for a friend's engagement party and had kept in the back of the closet because there was never an occasion that felt like mine anymore. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror and I said out loud, quietly, to my own reflection, "You know what you're doing." It wasn't a question. My husband looked surprised when I came downstairs. "You look nice," he said with a slight hesitation that might have been guilt or might have been calculation. I was no longer sure I could tell the difference. My mother-in-law was watching television in the living room and looked up and said, in that voice of hers that could make a compliment feel like a warning, very dramatic for a work dinner. I smiled and said nothing. We drove separately. He had reasons. He always had reasons. And I picked up Damon from the Joe station in Clarkson. He was standing outside in a dark jacket, hands in his pockets, and he looked at me when I pulled up and said, "You look like someone about to win something." I laughed for the first time in weeks. A real laugh. The kind that comes from somewhere low in your chest. In the car, I told him the truth, all of it. He listened, looking straight ahead, and at the end he said, "Okay, I'm here. Whatever you need." No drama, no performance, no questions that were really judgments. Just, I'm here. The restaurant was on Yorkville Avenue, all low lighting and dark wood and the kind of quiet that costs money. The firm had reserved a private dining room toward the back. When we walked in, my husband was already there, talking to a group of colleagues near the bar, a glass of red wine in hand. He saw me first. His expression moved through three things in very quick succession: surprise, something like relief, and then, as his eyes landed on Damon beside me, a new thing, tight and controlled, that I recognized as a man calculating. "You brought someone," he said. "I thought it might be nice not to come alone," I said. "You know how these work events can be." I introduced Damon by name, no further explanation. They shook hands with the particular formality of two men measuring something. My husband excused himself. I knew she was there before I saw her. There's a register of awareness you develop when you know someone is the answer to a question you've been carrying. She was standing near the window talking to a woman I didn't recognize, holding a glass of white wine, wearing a blouse in a shade of dusty rose. She was attractive in a specific way, polished, composed, the look of someone who had rehearsed being effortless. I watched her for a moment and felt nothing, which surprised me. I had expected anger. What I felt instead was something closer to clarity. Then Damon went still beside me. It was a very small thing, the way he went still. Just a half-second pause, the kind your body makes before your brain has caught up. I looked at him. His expression was controlled, but something behind his eyes had shifted. Surprise, and something beneath the surprise that was harder to read. "Are you all right?" I asked quietly. He cleared his throat. "That woman," he said, very low, "in the pink blouse." "Yes, I know her." I kept my face very neutral. "How?" He looked at me, and there was a long moment where we were both understanding something at the same time. "She was my sister's friend," he said slowly. "Years ago, before she moved. I haven't seen her in. She's married. Or she was. To a guy named Kevin. They live in Brampton." He paused. "Or they did." I said nothing for a moment. Then I said very quietly, "Are you certain?" "I stood at their wedding," he said. "I'm certain." I don't know what she saw when she finally noticed Damon. I wasn't watching her face at that exact moment. I was looking at the centerpiece on the table nearest me, a small arrangement of white flowers I couldn't name, focusing on breathing evenly. But I heard it, a sharp sound, the clean, sudden ring of crystal on hardwood, and then a sound from a woman that was not quite a word and not quite a scream, somewhere between the two, pressed through clenched teeth. I looked up. She was standing very still. The wine glass was on the floor, the stem intact but the bowl shattered, a spreading stain of pale gold on the dark wood. Her face had gone a particular kind of white, not the white of shock but the white of someone doing extremely fast arithmetic on a situation that is not going the way it was supposed to. Damon said her name. I didn't know her name, so I won't repeat it here. He said it with the mild surprise of a person who genuinely hadn't expected to see someone from years ago at a dinner in Yorkville. There was no accusation in it. There didn't need to be. The look she gave my husband lasted less than a second. But in that second, every person at that table who was paying attention understood the geometry of the situation. My husband's face did a thing I had never seen it do. He had always been composed. It was one of the first things I'd noticed about him. That composure, how nothing rattled him. How he could move through conflict like water around stone. That composure left him all at once. He looked between her and Damon, and between them and me, and something behind his eyes came apart quietly, like a seam giving way. Nobody moved for what felt like a long time. The dinner was, in the technical sense, completed. People sat down. Courses were served. A speech was made about the retiring partner's 30 years of service. I ate a very good halibut and drank one glass of a Niagara Chardonnay and spoke to the woman on my left, a junior associate named Helena who was passionate about climate litigation and didn't seem to know or care about the weather at our end of the table. I liked her immediately. Damon was good, steady, present, a warm gravity beside me that kept me from floating away from myself. He spoke when spoken to and asked good questions and laughed genuinely at one point at something the retiring partner said, and several people clearly liked him. And the retiring partner asked what he did, and they had a whole conversation about rates and actuarial tables that I followed only partially but found oddly grounding. My husband and she said very little for the remainder of the evening. That too was something. In the car afterward, Damon and I sat in the parking garage for a few minutes without immediately leaving. The engine was off. The garage was quiet except for the distant sound of the elevator. "Are you okay?" he asked. I thought about it honestly. "I will be," I said. "I think I've been planning to be okay for a while. Tonight just made it real." He nodded. He didn't say anything about what had happened at the table, about his history with her, about the dropped glass, about my husband's face, because there was nothing he needed to say. It had happened. We both saw it. That was enough. I filed for separation 3 weeks later. Lynn had the paperwork ready. The process was not simple and it was not fast. It never is in Ontario when there is property and a shared account and a house that is not technically yours, but which you have cleaned and maintained and cooked in for 3 years. It took time. There were meetings and mediations and phone calls that left me exhausted in a particular way. I can only describe as the exhaustion of being asked to justify your own existence. But I had opened that account. I had my documentation. I had Bea, who drove down from Hamilton every other weekend that first month and made soup and watched bad television with me and said the right things and the wrong things and sometimes just sat there, which was sometimes what I needed most. I had Lynn, who was formidable in the particular calm way of people who have spent 20 years watching people try to make unfair things seem fair. And I had my name. I kept saying it to myself quietly whenever things felt like they were going to swallow me. Nadia. 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 It sounds like a small thing. It was not a small thing. The divorce was finalized 10 months after that dinner. I received my equalization payment under Ontario family law. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to put a damage deposit and first month's rent on a one-bedroom in Hamilton, close to Bea, close to the water. I found a contract position at a small branding studio that turned into something more permanent. I took the Joe train every morning and looked out the window at Lake Ontario and felt something I hadn't felt in years. A quiet, ordinary sense that the day ahead belonged to me. I don't know what happened with his marriage. I've heard she's still with her husband, or that she isn't, or that nobody knows. I have stopped trying to follow the story. It was never really my story. What I know is what happened to me. I was a person who handed over her independence piece by piece because someone she loved asked her to, and because she was young, and because the word trust got tangled up with the word surrender, and she didn't notice for a long time. I got it back. Not all at once, not cleanly, not without cost, but I got it back. Damon and I had coffee twice that fall in a small place near the waterfront in Burlington that made excellent cortados and had mismatched chairs. The second time, it rained the whole afternoon and we stayed too long and talked about things that had nothing to do with my husband or his ex-acquaintance or anything that had already happened. He made me laugh. Not the polite laugh I'd spent years deploying like a social tool, but the real one. The one that starts before you can decide whether to let it. I'm not telling you that part because it's the point. I'm telling you it because it's true. And because for a long time I thought the thing I needed was justice or vindication or to watch something fall apart that deserved to fall apart. And those things happened more or less in their own way. But the thing that actually mattered was simpler than any of that. It was sitting across a table from someone who knew my name and asked me questions and listened to the answers, in a city that was beginning to feel like mine, in a life that was beginning to feel like mine, on an afternoon in November with rain on the windows and nowhere I had to be. That's what I got back. That's what I was always trying to get back. I think about that moment in the parking garage a lot. The engine off, the rain somewhere outside the concrete walls, Damon sitting quietly beside me without needing to fill the silence. I had spent 5 years in a house where silence was always loaded with something. That night, it was just quiet. That's how I knew something had shifted. What happened to me didn't happen all at once. That's the part nobody tells you. There's no single morning where you wake up and realize you've been disappearing. It's gradual. A job you give up, an account you stop being able to see, an opinion you learn not to voice because the energy required to defend it isn't worth what comes after. By the time I understood what my life had become, I had been slowly, quietly handing myself over for years. And the honest thing I have to say about that is, I let it happen. Not because I was weak, but because I confused love with compliance. I thought trusting someone meant removing all the walls. I didn't understand yet that some walls aren't barriers. They're just the outline of who you are. B had given Lynn my number 3 months before I called. 3 months! I think about those 3 months sometimes. All the dinners I cooked and critiqued, all the mornings I stood at that kitchen window watching the yellow Adirondack chairs and telling myself things were fine. I wasn't ready, and I think that matters too. You can't make someone ready. But when I finally called, I was ready enough. That's all it takes, not certainty, just enough. Lynn taught me something I carry with me still, that understanding your own situation clearly, without the fog of emotion or fear, is not coldness. It's a form of respect for yourself. She sat across from me and explained things in plain language and treated me like someone capable of handling the truth, and in doing so, she reminded me that I was. That kind of clarity, the willingness to see things as they are instead of as you wish they were, is something I had stopped practicing. I had to learn it again from scratch. And Damon showed up iron shirt and all to a dinner he didn't fully understand for a person he hadn't spoken to in months because she asked and he said yes. He didn't perform goodness. He just was it. Standing there in the parking garage, being honest about what he saw, asking if I was okay before anything else. There's a kind of integrity in that. Quiet, unglamorous, completely reliable, that I had forgotten to look for in people because I had stopped believing I deserved it. What I know now is that the things that fell apart were supposed to fall apart, not because the universe arranged it, because actions compound. Dishonesty requires more dishonesty. Control requires more control. And somewhere along the way, the people who chose those things made choices that circled back to them. At a dinner in Yorkville on a hardwood floor and the sound of breaking glass. I didn't plan for any of it to happen the way it did. I just stopped pretending it wasn't happening. My name is Nadia. I have a one-bedroom in Hamilton and a job I'm proud of, and a sister who makes soup and a man who asked how I was before he asked anything else. I got my life back the slow way, not dramatically, not all at once, but honestly. That turned out to be the only way that mattered.